The doors were 300 meters tall. They were carved from a metal that did not exist on Earth, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the light of 1,000 floating orbs. And when they opened, the sound they made was like the universe itself taking a breath. Ambassador David Cross stood at the threshold and looked into the grand chamber of the Galactic Council. He was 54 years old. He had gray hair, steady hands, and the kind of face that revealed nothing. Behind him, the escort of armored guards had stopped. They would go no further. The Council's message had been very clear. One human, unarmed, no communication devices, no recording equipment, no hope of rescue. David walked forward into the light. The chamber was impossible. That was the only word for it. It stretched upward into darkness, with tiers of seating rising so high that the uppermost rows disappeared into shadow. Each tier held representatives of a different species. Some were humanoid, some were crystalline, some were clouds of gas contained in magnetic fields. Some had too many eyes. Some had no eyes at all. 783 species. Rulers of 11,000 worlds. Masters of technology that made human science look like. Children playing with sticks. And every single. One of them was looking at David cross. His footsteps echoed on the polished floor as he approached the central platform. It was a circle of white stone, raised slightly above the surrounding surface, bathed in a column of light that came from somewhere far above. The Judgment Circle, they called it. The place where the fate of civilizations was decided. David stepped onto the platform and stopped. He clasped his hands behind his back and waited. The silence stretched for 10 heartbeats. 20, 30. Then a voice spoke, and it came from everywhere at once. David Cross of Earth, you stand before the Galactic Council to answer for the crimes of your species. The speaker descended from the highest tier, floating on a platform of pure energy. It was a being called Thalvex, the Supreme Mediator, the voice of the Council. Its body was humanoid in shape, but composed of something that looked like frozen lightning, constantly shifting and crackling with contained power. Your species has violated the quarantine protocols, Thalvex continued, its voice resonating through David's bones. You have developed technology beyond your permitted level. You have made contact with restricted species. You have interfered in conflicts that did not concern you. The punishment for these crimes is absolute. Your world will be cleansed. Your colonies will be destroyed. Your species will be erased from existence. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Clicks and hisses and sounds that human ears could not properly interpret. David noticed that some delegates leaned forward with anticipation. Others seemed uncomfortable. A few, he thought, looked almost afraid. Interesting. Do you have anything to say before sentence is carried out? Thalvex asked. David took a slow breath. He had prepared for this moment for 3 years. Everything depended on the next few minutes. I do, he said. His voice was calm, steady, almost conversational. But first, I have a question. The chamber went silent again. Defendants did not ask questions. Defendants begged for mercy, or proclaimed their innocence, or raged against their fate. They did not stand calmly on the judgment circle and ask questions. Speak, Thalvex said, and there was something new in his voice. Curiosity, perhaps. Or caution. You said that humanity has violated the quarantine protocols, that we developed technology beyond our permitted level. David paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled delegates. My question is simple. How did you know? Thalvex's form flickered with what might have been confusion. Your world has been monitored since before your species achieved sentience. Our observation drones have tracked every step of your development. Yes, David agreed. Your observation drones. The ones you placed in orbit around Earth 4,000 years ago. The ones that have watched us build cities and fight wars and reach for the stars. He smiled slightly. The ones that stopped transmitting accurate data 12 years ago. The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of 783 species suddenly realizing that something was very wrong. "Explain yourself," Thalvex commanded. David reached into his jacket pocket. 100 weapons immediately powered up throughout the chamber, aimed at his head. He ignored them and pulled out a small object, no larger than his thumb. It was made of dark metal, smooth and featureless. "This," he said, "is one of your observation drones. Or rather, it is what remains of one. We captured it 12 years ago. We studied it. We learned its language, its protocols, its methods of communication. And then we reprogrammed it." He held the tiny object up to the light. "For 12 years, every drone orbiting Earth has been sending you exactly what we wanted you to see. You think you know what humanity has achieved. You think you know our level of technology, our military strength, our capabilities." David's smile widened. "You know nothing." The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in languages that human translators could not process. Several species began emergency communications with their homeworlds. The Keth delegation, massive armored beings who had conquered 30 star systems, rose to their feet in outrage. Thalvex raised one crackling hand, and silence fell instantly. "You admit to deceiving the Galactic Council," the Supreme Mediator said slowly. "You admit to tampering with our observation network. These are additional crimes. They do not help your case." "I am not trying to help my case," David replied. "I am trying to explain why you should reconsider your sentence. Because what I have just told you is only the beginning." He turned slowly, addressing not just Thalvex, but the entire assembly. 12 years ago, humanity discovered that we were being watched. That we had been watched for millennia. That we were scheduled for recruitment or elimination based on your assessment of our development. His voice hardened. "We chose a third option." "There is no third option," Thalvex said. "There is now." David clasped his hands behind his back again. "For 12 years we have been preparing, building, planning, and now, standing here before you, I am going to tell you exactly what we have done. Not because you can stop us, but because you need to understand something important." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "There is a reason why there should be an empty seat at every war table in this galaxy. A seat reserved for Earth, a seat reserved for humanity. And when I am finished speaking, you will understand why." Thalvex's form crackled with energy. The Supreme Mediator was ancient, powerful, and utterly unaccustomed to being challenged. But there was something in the human's eyes, something in his absolute calm, that gave even this cosmic being pause. "Speak then, human," Thalvex said at last. "Tell us your story. But know this, when you are finished, if we are not convinced, your world dies." David Cross nodded slowly. "Then I had better be convincing." And he began to speak. David Cross began his story not with war, but with a woman named Helen Vance. 12 years ago, Helen was a scientist working at a deep space research station beyond the orbit of Neptune. She was 32 years old, brilliant, and utterly alone when she detected the signal. It was a pattern of radio waves coming from empty space. Not random, not natural. A message repeated every 47 seconds in a language that no human had ever heard. Helen spent 6 months decoding that signal. She worked in secret, telling no one, because she understood something that would change everything. The signal was not meant for humanity. It was a report sent from an observation drone to its masters somewhere in the distant stars. A report about Earth, about humans, about what they called the quarantine subject designated Sol-3. The report said that humanity was progressing normally, that their technology was developing at the expected rate, that they would be ready for first contact in approximately 800 years, at which point they would be given a choice: join the Galactic Council as a junior member, or be eliminated as a potential threat. Helen read that report and felt something cold settle into her bones. Humanity was not alone in the universe. They never had been. They were being watched, measured, judged by beings who would decide their fate without ever asking their opinion. She took her findings to the United Nations Security Council. The meeting that followed lasted for 72 hours. When it ended, the nations of Earth had agreed on something for the first time in human history. They would not wait 800 years to be judged. David paused in his testimony, letting the words sink into the vast chamber. The delegates watched him with expressions ranging from contempt to curiosity to something that might have been fear. He could see them calculating, wondering what this story meant for their own species, their own plans. He continued, the first thing humanity did was capture the observation drone. It took 18 months and the combined resources of every major space agency on Earth, but they did it. They brought the drone down without damaging it, and they studied it in a laboratory built specifically for this purpose, hidden beneath the mountains of a remote region where no satellite could see. The drone was a masterpiece of engineering. Its technology was thousands of years beyond anything humanity had achieved. Its power source alone could have revolutionized human civilization. Its communication systems could reach across the galaxy in seconds. But humanity did not simply study the drone. They interrogated it. The drone's memory contained more than just observation reports. It contained history. The history of the Galactic Council, going back 2 billion years. The history of every species that had risen to intelligence, been evaluated, and either welcomed into the community of stars or erased from existence. There were thousands of such species. Tens of thousands. And humanity noticed something that changed everything. Every species followed the same path. They discovered fire. They built cities. They created technology. They reached for the stars. And at every stage, they did exactly what the Council predicted they would do. They were predictable, controllable, safe. Humanity was different. David raised his voice slightly, making sure every delegate could hear. According to the Council's own records, humanity should have taken another 3 million years to reach their current level of development. They should have discovered nuclear power in the year 4200. They should have achieved spaceflight in the year 5800. They should have been exactly where the models said they would be. Instead, they had done everything 800 times faster than any species in galactic history. The chamber stirred. Thalvex leaned forward, its form crackling with increased intensity. This was new information. This was not in any of their reports. David smiled grimly. Of course, it was not in their reports. Humanity had made sure of that 12 years ago when they reprogrammed the observation drones. The Council still thought humans were primitive creatures, barely capable of leaving their own planet. They had no idea what humanity had become. For 12 years, while the drones sent false reports, humanity had been busy. They had taken the knowledge from the captured drone and used it. Not to build weapons, although they had done that too, but to do something far more important. They had reached out to the species that the Council had forgotten. The chamber went very quiet. David could see delegates exchanging glances, communicating in ways he could not understand. He had their attention now. Complete attention, he explained. The Council controlled thousands of worlds, but they did not care about most of them. They watched the species that might become threats and ignored the ones that had already been broken. The conquered, the subjugated, the ones who had lost their wars and been stripped of their independence. Species like the Trell, aquatic engineers whose homeworld had been poisoned by industrial exploitation. Species like the Morven, silicon-based beings who had been enslaved as computing processors. Species like the Vesher, empaths who had been psychologically shattered and used as interrogators against their will. These species had nothing. They had been forgotten. They had been deemed worthless by the mighty Galactic Council, but they had knowledge. Millions of years of accumulated wisdom, engineering principles, scientific discoveries, secrets that the Council had buried or ignored. Humanity found them. Humanity reached out to them, carefully, secretly, through communication channels that the Council never monitored because they had deemed these species beneath notice. And humanity asked him a single question. What would you do if you could start over? The Trell had taught humanity how to build ships that could travel faster than light without leaving any trace. The Morven had shared computing architectures that made human technology look primitive. The Vesher had explained how to shield minds from telepathic detection, how to hide intentions from beings who could read thoughts. In exchange, humanity had given them something they had not had in centuries. Hope. David fell silent, letting the implications settle over the chamber. He could see the calculations happening in alien minds throughout the vast space. The Council had conquered thousands of species. They had broken them, used them, forgotten them. And now they were learning that those forgotten species had been sharing their secrets with the one species that had never been conquered at all. Ilvex spoke, and its voice was different now, colder, more careful. You claim to have formed alliances with restricted species. This is a violation of the highest order. This alone is grounds for immediate extinction. David nodded slowly. I know, and I am not finished. There is more? There is much more. He clasped his hands behind his back. Because what I have told you so far is only the foundation, the preparation. What comes next is the reason why you should be very, very careful about what you do in the next hour. He paused, meeting the Supreme Mediator's gaze directly. Shall I continue? The chamber waited. 783 species, masters of the galaxy, hung on the words of a single human standing alone in a circle of light. Alovex gestured with one crackling hand. Continue. David Cross took a slow breath and continued his story. The chamber had grown still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Every delegate was watching. Every sensor was recording. The fate of Earth hung on what he said next. He began with a name. Admiral Marcus Webb. 7 years ago, Marcus Webb commanded the first vessel of what humanity called the Shadow Fleet. The ship was called Whisper. It was 200 meters long, armed with weapons that could crack a planet, and completely invisible to every sensor system in the known galaxy. The Trell had taught humanity how to bend light around a hull. The Morven had designed computers that could predict detection patterns and avoid them. The Vesher had shown how to mask the electromagnetic signatures that every ship produced. Together, these technologies created something that had never existed before. Perfect stealth. Not stealth that could be defeated by better sensors. Not stealth that failed under close inspection. True invisibility, the kind that made a ship simply cease to exist as far as the universe was concerned. Admiral Webb had taken Whisper on its first mission with a crew of 40 volunteers. They knew they might never return. They knew that if they were discovered, Earth would be destroyed before they could send a warning. They went anyway. Their mission was simple. Travel to the Kef homeworld, the seat of the most powerful military force in the Galactic Council, and take up position in orbit around their primary military installation. And wait. David paused, letting the words hang in the air. The Kef delegation had gone very still. Their massive armored forms were motionless, but David could see the tension in them. They were beginning to understand. Admiral Webb and his crew spent 6 months in orbit around the Keth Command Center. They watched patrol ships pass within meters of their hull. They observed security drills designed to detect any intrusion. They listened to communications that revealed the locations of every Keth military asset in the galaxy. They were never detected. Not once, when Whisper returned to Earth, Admiral Webb delivered his report to the leaders of humanity. The stealth technology worked. The galaxy's most advanced military power had no way to see them coming. The leaders asked what he recommended. Admiral Webb's answer changed everything. Do not attack, he said. Do not reveal ourselves. Instead, build more ships. Send them to every strategic location in the galaxy. Place them in orbit around every world that could threaten Earth. And then wait. Humanity followed his recommendation. Over the next 6 years, they built 300 stealth vessels. Each one was crewed by volunteers who knew they might spend years in silent darkness, watching and waiting. They called themselves the Ghosts. And they went everywhere. David raised his hand and pointed directly at the Keth delegation. Right now, there are 4 stealth vessels in orbit around your homeworld. They have been there for 5 years. They have watched your children grow. They have observed your military exercises. They have mapped every defensive installation, every weapons platform, every command center on your world. The Keth ambassador rose to its full height, nearly 3 meters of armored fury. This is impossible. Our sensors would have detected them. Our patrols would have found them. Your sensors detected nothing, David replied calmly. Your patrols found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Our ships exist outside your ability to perceive them. They are there, and they are not there. They are ghosts. He turned slowly, addressing the full chamber. The same is true for every major military power in this council. The Vrel Confederacy has 6 ships watching their shipyards. The Thon Empire has 8 ships positioned around their capital. The Nexus Collective has 12 ships monitoring their communication hubs. He paused. Even this station, this headquarters of the Galactic Council itself, has 2 vessels holding position less than 1 kilometer from where we stand. Chaos erupted. Delegates screamed for security. Weapons powered up throughout the chamber. Thalvex's form expanded with crackling energy, filling the space with light and thunder. Lies! The Supreme Mediator roared. Deception and lies. Our sensors show nothing. David stood perfectly still in the center of the storm. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but somehow it cut through the noise. I am not lying, and I can prove it. The chamber fell silent again, not because anyone believed him, but because they needed to hear what he would say next. 3 minutes ago, I sent a signal using a device implanted in my tooth. It was a simple code, nothing more than a series of numbers. That code was received by one of our vessels positioned near this station. He checked his watch, a gesture so human that it seemed almost absurd in this cosmic arena. In approximately 30 seconds, that vessel will briefly deactivate its stealth systems. For exactly 5 seconds, it will become visible to your sensors, long enough for you to confirm that it exists. And then it will disappear again, and you will have no way to find it. Thalvex gestured sharply, and massive holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber. They showed the space around the council station. Empty space. Darkness and stars and nothing else. 20 seconds passed. 20-5. At exactly 30 seconds, something appeared on every display. A ship, 200 meters long, bristling with weapons, hanging motionless in the void less than a kilometer from the station's hull. The chamber went completely silent. 5 seconds later, the ship vanished. Not destroyed. Not flying away. Simply gone as if it had never existed. David Cross lowered his hand. We could have destroyed you, he said quietly. At any point in the last 7 years, we could have given the order, and every major military power in this galaxy would have lost their command structure in a single coordinated strike. We could have crippled the Galactic Council before you knew you were under attack. He stepped forward, and for the first time, his voice carried real weight. We chose not to. Thalvex's form had dimmed. The Supreme Mediator no longer radiated power and authority. It radiated something that might have been shock or fear. Why? It asked. If you had this power, why did you not use it? David smiled, and there was sadness in it. Because that is not who we are. We built the Shadow Fleet as a deterrent, not a weapon. We wanted to ensure that no one could destroy Earth without consequences. But we never wanted to destroy anyone else. He turned to address the full chamber once more. However, the Shadow Fleet is not the only thing we have built. It is not even the most important thing. What I am about to tell you next is the real reason why you should reconsider your plans for humanity. The delegates leaned forward. Even the Keth, even the species who had been screaming for human blood moments ago, waited in anticipation. Shall I continue? David asked. No one spoke. No one moved. He continued. The Shadow Fleet was power. Pure, devastating power that could bring the galaxy to its knees. But David Cross knew something that the Galactic Council had forgotten long ago. Power alone was not enough. Power could destroy, but it could not build. It could conquer, but it could not connect. Humanity needed something else. Something that the Council had never faced. Something that their predictive models could not anticipate. They called it the Kindness Protocol. David explained it slowly, choosing his words with care. While the Shadow Fleet watched from the darkness, while the galaxy believed that humanity was still primitive and harmless, thousands of human volunteers had traveled to the forgotten corners of the cosmos. They went to worlds that the Council had abandoned, colonies that had been stripped of resources and left to die, refugee camps on planets too damaged to support life, species that had been conquered, broken, and deemed worthless by the mighty powers of the galaxy. They did not go with weapons. They did not go with demands. They went with something far more dangerous. They went to help. A woman named Rosa had spent 3 years on a poisoned Trell world, teaching the survivors how to filter toxins from their water, using technology that humans had developed specifically for this purpose. A man named James had worked alongside the enslaved Morven, developing software that could break their mental conditioning without alerting their masters. A doctor named Elise had traveled to 17 different worlds, treating diseases that the Council considered beneath their attention. They asked for nothing in return. No payment, no treaties, no promises of alliance. They simply helped, and then they moved on to help someone else. David paused, watching the faces of the delegates around him. Confusion, suspicion, disbelief. These beings could not understand what he was describing. The Galactic Council operated on principles of power and control. Every action had a purpose. Every gift came with strings attached. The idea of genuine, unconditional help was as alien to them as faster-than-light travel had once been to humanity. Why? Thalvex asked. The Supreme Mediator's voice was quiet now, stripped of its earlier thunder. What did you gain from this? David smiled. Everything. He explained. Over 10 years, human volunteers had directly helped more than 400 species across the galaxy. Most of these species had never heard of Earth. They had no strategic value. They could offer nothing that humanity could not build for themselves. But they remembered. They remembered the humans who had come to them in their darkest hour. They remembered the strangers who had asked nothing and given everything. They remembered kindness in a galaxy that had shown them none. And when those species heard that Earth was threatened, when they learned that the Galactic Council, planned to destroy the one people who had ever treated them with compassion. They did something that the council had not anticipated. They acted. David raised his hand and gestured toward the holographic displays that still floated throughout the chamber. The image changed. Instead of empty space, the screens now showed a different view. A view of the Keth homeworld, the seat of the council's greatest military power. The Keth delegation went very still around their world. Filling the space between their orbital stations and defensive platforms was a fleet. Not a human fleet. Something far larger. Ships from dozens of different species, designs that had not been seen in centuries. Vessels that had been thought destroyed or obsolete. Trell watershapers. Morven computational cruisers. Vesher empathic frigates. And more, so many more. Species that had been conquered and forgotten. Species that had been written off as worthless. Species that the council had not thought about in 1,000 years. They had all come. Thousands of ships. Tens of thousands. An armada assembled not through threats or treaties, but through something the council had forgotten. Could exist. Gratitude. The chamber descended into chaos once again. Delegates screamed at each other in languages that human translators could not process. Several species began emergency communications with their homeworlds. The Keth ambassador looked at the display of ships surrounding their world and made a sound that might have been rage or might have been terror. Thalvex raised both hands, and silence fell. But it was a different silence than before. It was the silence of beings who had just realized that everything they believed was wrong. You orchestrated this, the Supreme Mediator said. You spent years planning this moment, building alliances, positioning your pieces, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal your true power. David shook his head slowly. No, we did not orchestrate anything. We helped people who needed help. That is all. We did not ask for their support. We did not demand their allegiance. We did not even tell them about the Council's plans for Earth. He stepped forward, and his voice hardened. They came on their own. When they heard what you planned to do to us, they came. Not because we asked them to. Because they chose to. Because for the first time in their long, painful histories, someone had shown them that kindness was possible. The Supreme Mediator's form flickered. You are saying that this fleet appeared without your knowledge? Without your coordination? I am saying that we earned their loyalty, but we never demanded it. There is a difference. David turned to face the full chamber. Look at the screen. Look at those ships. Most of those species have been enemies for centuries. They have fought wars that lasted longer than human civilization. They have hated each other across generations. He paused, letting the truth sink in. Today, they are standing together. Not because they fear a common enemy. Not because they signed treaties or made bargains. They are standing together because they all have one thing in common. One memory that binds them. Humans helped them. Humans showed them that compassion still existed. Humans gave them hope. The chamber was utterly silent now. No more outrage. No more demands. Only the weight of realization pressing down on 783 species. David turned back to Thalvex. You asked me earlier why we did not use the Shadow Fleet to destroy you. The answer is Sim. Plea, we do not want to destroy you. We do not want to conquer you. We do not even want to fight you. He spread his hands, encompassing the vast chamber, the assembled delegates, the entire Galactic Council. We want to show you that there is another way. A way that does not require control or conquest. A way built on connection rather than coercion. The fleet around the Keth homeworld is not a threat. It is a message. What message? Thalvex asked. David Cross smiled. That kindness is not weakness. That compassion is not foolishness. That the bonds built through genuine help are stronger than any treaty or threat or weapon. He clasped his hands behind his back. Now, do you still want to destroy Earth? Or would you like to hear my proposal? The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 2 billion years. In all that time, no defendant had ever made a proposal. Defendants begged. Defendants submitted. Defendants accepted the judgment of their superiors, or were destroyed for refusing to do so. David Cross was neither begging nor submitting. He was standing on the judgment circle, surrounded by 783 species who could end his world with a single vote, and he was making demands. The proposal was simple, he explained. Humanity would remain outside the Galactic Council. They would not join as members, junior or otherwise. They would not accept the Council's laws or submit to its authority. They would remain independent, answering to no one but themselves. In exchange, they would offer something the Council had never had. An ally who could not be predicted. A partner who operated outside their models. A force that would help when help was needed, without demanding anything in return. Alvex's form crackled with barely contained energy. You ask us to accept your independence after you have threatened our entire civilization? After you have surrounded our military headquarters with a hostile fleet? This is not a proposal. This is extortion. David shook his head. The fleet is not ours. We did not summon it. We cannot command it. Those species came because they chose to come, because they believe in what humanity represents. If we tried to use them as a weapon, they would leave. He stepped closer to the Supreme Mediator. But that is precisely the point. The power we have shown you today is not the power of weapons or threats. It is the power of trust. Hundreds of species trust humanity because we have proven ourselves worthy of that trust. If you destroy Earth, you do not just kill one species. You shatter that trust. You prove that kindness is meaningless, that compassion leads only to death. David's voice hardened. And those species out there, the ones who finally found hope because of us, they will remember. They will remember that the Galactic Council destroyed the only people who ever helped them. Do you think they will remain peaceful? Do you think they will accept your authority after that? The chamber stirred. Delegates exchanged glances. For the first time, David saw real fear in their expressions. Not fear of human weapons. Fear of what would happen if humanity was destroyed. The Council had ruled through prediction and control for 2 billion years. Their power rested on stability, on knowing exactly what every species would do and preparing accordingly. But now they faced something they could not predict. A network of loyalty built on kindness rather than coercion. Bonds that could not be measured or modeled. A force that operated entirely outside their understanding. Thalvex descended to the floor of the chamber, its massive form towering over David. The Supreme Mediator had never stood at ground level before. It had never faced a defendant as an equal. If we accept your proposal, the entity said slowly, what happens next? David met its gaze without flinching. We continue doing what we have always done. We help. We build connections. We show the galaxy that there is an alternative to conquest and control. And the Shadow Fleet remains where it is, watching, waiting, ensuring that no one threatens Earth while we do our work. David paused. But it will never fire unless fired upon. We give you our word. Thalvex was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, it turned to face the assembled delegates. The Council will vote. The process took 3 hours. Each species cast their decision in turn, using systems that humanity did not fully understand. Some voted quickly. Others deliberated for what seemed like eternities. The Keth abstained entirely, their massive forms motionless and unreadable. When the final vote was cast, Thalvex's form pulsed with light. The decision is as follows. The charges against Earth are withdrawn. Humanity will not be destroyed. Furthermore, the Council recognizes humanity as an independent entity, not subject to our laws or authority. David felt something loosen in his chest. He had not realized how tightly he had been holding himself until this moment, but the Supreme Mediator was not finished. However, this recognition comes with conditions. Humanity will be given a permanent seat in this chamber, not as a member, but as an observer. A reminder. David frowned. A reminder of what? Thalvex's form flickered with something that might have been the first hint of respect David had seen from this ancient being. A reminder that there are ways of building power that we have forgotten. A reminder that kindness can be stronger than force. A reminder that the galaxy is larger than our models and more complex than our predictions. The Supreme Mediator gestured, and at the very center of the chamber, directly opposite the judge's throne, a new platform rose from the floor. On it stood a single chair, simple and unadorned. "This seat will remain empty," Thalvex declared. "It will be reserved for Earth, for humanity. Not because you demand it, but because we must never forget what happened here today." David looked at the empty chair. He thought about the Shadow Fleet, waiting in the darkness. He thought about the volunteers who had spent years helping strangers. He thought about the hundreds of species who had come to defend a world they had never seen. "Empty," he said softly. "Why empty?" Thalvex's form settled into something almost peaceful. "Because you told us the truth, Ambassador Cross. Humanity does not belong in war councils. You do not think like warriors. You do not plan like conquerors. You help. That is what you do." The Supreme Mediator rose back to its throne. "So the seat will remain empty, waiting for the day when humanity chooses to join us. And every time this council gathers to discuss war, every time we consider violence as a solution, we will look at that empty chair and remember. We will remember that there is always another way." David Cross stood alone in the center of the grand chamber, surrounded by the rulers of 11,000 worlds. And he smiled. 10 years later, the empty seat is still there. It has never been filled. Every war council, every military summit, every gathering where destruction is contemplated, the delegates look at that chair and pause. They remember the human ambassador who refused to beg. They remember the Shadow Fleet that chose mercy over massacre. They remember the volunteers who gave kindness to the forgotten dot. And sometimes, when the debate grows heated and violence seems inevitable, someone will point to the empty seat and say 4 simple words. What would humans do? The answer is always the same. Find another way. Help instead of harm. Build instead of break. That is why there is a permanent, empty seat at every war table, reserved for Earth, reserved for humanity, reserved for hope.